You don't belong at this table." The sentence cut through the cheerful noise of the cafeteria so sharply that it seemed to silence every clatter of trays for just a heartbeat. Malcolm Brooks stopped mid-step, one polished dress, shoe, still hovering above the waxed floor as his eyes searched the crowded room. He had walked through those double doors carrying nothing more than a plain brown paper bag with his daughter's favorite homemade chocolate chip cookies inside, hoping to surprise 11-year-old Ava during lunch after missing 2 weeks of family meals because of non-stop board meetings. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit. There was no luxury watch peeking beneath his sleeve, no security detail trailing behind him, no assistant answering calls. Just faded jeans, a charcoal hoodie, clean white sneakers, and the tired smile of a father looking forward to 30 quiet minutes with his little girl. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Malcolm. The cafeteria smelled of pizza slices, warm rolls, and fresh apples. Hundreds of voices blended into the familiar soundtrack of an American school lunch period. But Malcolm heard only one. "You heard me," the woman repeated, louder this time. "This table isn't for kids like you." Malcolm's eyes settled on the far corner of the cafeteria. Ava stood perfectly still, both hands wrapped around her lunch tray. She wasn't crying. She wasn't arguing. She simply stared at the cafeteria manager with the quiet composure Malcolm had always admired, even though no 11-year-old should ever have to wear that expression. Linda Carter folded her arms, convinced she was the unquestioned authority in the room. Several students looked away, pretending not to notice. Others whispered behind their milk cartons. A few laughed nervously, uncertain whether they were witnessing discipline or something far uglier. Malcolm remained where he was. Every instinct as a father urged him to rush forward, but years of leading companies had taught him that the truth revealed itself fastest when people believed no one important was watching. Across the room, a young teacher named Emily Foster glanced uneasily between Ava and Linda, her face tightening as though something about the exchange felt deeply wrong. Near the serving line, a cafeteria worker paused with a stack of trays suspended in her hands. Even the conversations nearest the corner began to fade as more students sensed the tension spreading across the room. Ava finally spoke, her voice calm enough to surprise even the adults around her. "I always sit here. Mrs. Reynolds told me I could." Linda barely looked at her. "Well, today you're sitting somewhere else." Malcolm's grip tightened around the paper bag until the edges crinkled softly beneath his fingers. The cookies inside were still warm. They had been baked before sunrise because he wanted this lunch to become one of those ordinary memories fathers treasure forever. Instead, something else was unfolding before his eyes, and with every passing second, the room seemed less like a school cafeteria and more like a place where character, prejudice, and courage were about to be tested in front of everyone. Malcolm did not move. Years before he had learned that the loudest person in the room rarely controlled the truth. He let the silence breathe while his eyes followed every expression around the cafeteria. Ava lowered her lunch tray onto the edge of the table exactly as she had been taught, careful not to spill the carton of milk resting beside her apple slices. She did not argue. She did not plead. She simply waited, believing that if she remained respectful, the adults would eventually do the right thing. Malcolm wished that belief were always rewarded. Linda Carter pointed toward a smaller table tucked beside the trash and recycling bins. "You can eat over there," she said flatly. "This section is reserved today." Ava looked across the room. Several empty seats remained at the table where she normally sat with her classmates. She spoke softly. "Mrs. Reynolds assigned our seats at the beginning of the semester. My friends are sitting there." Linda barely glanced at the children already eating lunch. Plans. Change. A few students shifted uncomfortably. One little boy looked as though he wanted to invite Ava back to the table, but he lowered his head when Linda's eyes swept across the room. Fear had a way of making decent people unusually quiet. Emily Foster stepped forward from the nearby hallway carrying a folder of classroom papers. "Linda," she said carefully, "I believe Ava is supposed to remain with her class." Linda answered without turning around. "I am managing the cafeteria. You manage your classroom." Emily hesitated. Something about the exchange bothered her more with every passing second. Malcolm noticed that hesitation. He also noticed the cafeteria employees exchanging uncertain looks behind the serving counter. None of them spoke. None of them smiled. They simply continued placing vegetables and fruit into plastic trays while pretending not to listen. Malcolm had seen the same expressions in corporate conference rooms years earlier whenever someone abused authority and everyone else hoped the moment would simply disappear. It almost never did. Ava picked up her tray again and started walking toward the isolated table without another word. Every step seemed heavier than the last. Malcolm felt the paper bag crinkle again beneath his hand. He remembered the excitement in her voice the night before when she asked whether he might finally be able to join her for lunch after missing so many school events because of work. He had promised her that nothing would interfere this time. He intended to keep that promise, but not the way he had imagined only minutes earlier. Emily took another cautious step. "Linda, I really think we should call the principal before making this decision." Linda finally turned, her expression hardening. "There is nothing to discuss." Then she reached toward Ava's lunch tray and said loudly enough for nearby students and parents volunteering in the cafeteria to hear, "Until this is sorted out, she does not need to be eating with everyone else." At that exact moment, Malcolm finally started walking, and every eye in the cafeteria slowly turned toward the quiet man in the charcoal hoodie whose calm expression revealed nothing except that he had heard every single word. Malcolm's footsteps were unhurried, almost impossibly calm, yet each one seemed to quiet another corner of the cafeteria until even the laughter that usually filled the lunch period began to disappear. Ava looked up and recognized her father immediately, but she did not call out to him. She simply held his eyes for a brief moment, and in that silent exchange Malcolm saw everything she refused to say. She was embarrassed, confused, and trying very hard to stay brave. Linda Carter noticed the man approaching and dismissed him with a quick glance. To her, he was just another casually dressed parent arriving at an inconvenient moment. "Sir," she said before Malcolm could speak, "we are handling a school matter. Please wait outside the cafeteria." Malcolm nodded once, but did not stop walking. "I would like to understand what happened first," he replied evenly. His voice carried no anger, only quiet certainty. Linda folded her arms more tightly. "Your daughter was instructed to move, and instead of cooperating, she decided to question school authority." Ava immediately shook her head. "Dad, I only asked why." Malcolm looked at her, then back at Linda. "Did she refuse?" "That is not the point," Linda answered sharply. "Students are expected to follow instructions without creating disruptions." Emily Foster stepped closer, her expression growing more concerned by the second. "She did not create a disruption," she said carefully. She asked one respectful question. Linda turned toward Emily with visible irritation. "I do not remember asking for your opinion." Several students exchanged nervous looks. One girl quietly slid over, leaving an empty seat where Ava had been sitting only moments earlier, as though silently inviting her friend back. Another student whispered, "She always eats with us." Their words were soft, but Malcolm heard them. So did several parents volunteering along the cafeteria wall. The atmosphere continued to change. People who had been focused on lunch now watched every sentence, every glance, every decision. Malcolm had spent decades sitting across negotiating tables worth billions of dollars. He understood, something many people never learned. Crowds rarely changed because of one dramatic moment. They changed because ordinary people slowly realized they had been watching something that was not right. Linda seemed completely unaware of that shift. She pointed again toward the isolated table. "That seat is available. If she wants to eat lunch today, that is where she will sit." Malcolm calmly asked, "Why?" Linda hesitated for barely a second before replying. "Because that is my decision." Emily inhaled slowly. "Actually, there is no policy requiring that." Linda shot her a cold look. "Enough." A cafeteria employee standing behind the serving line lowered his eyes, clearly uncomfortable. Another quietly stopped refilling the milk cooler just to listen. The room had become unusually still. Malcolm noticed every face. None of them looked confident anymore. They looked uncertain, as though they sensed they were witnessing something much larger than a disagreement over seating. Malcolm reached into the pocket of his hoodie, not for a wallet or identification, but for his phone. He unlocked the screen without taking his eyes off Linda. She noticed the movement and smiled with quiet confidence. "If you are planning to complain," she said, "the principal already trusts my judgment." Malcolm looked at the display for one brief second before slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Thank you," he said softly. "That is exactly what I needed to know." Emily stared at him, puzzled by the unexpected response, while Linda's confident expression never changed. She believed she had just ended the conversation. She had no idea she had actually begun something that would soon reach far beyond the cafeteria walls. Emily Foster took one more step forward, this time with enough confidence that several students turned toward her instead of Linda. "I was with this class when they entered the cafeteria," she said calmly. Ava followed every instruction. She sat where she has been assigned since the beginning of the semester. Linda exhaled impatiently, as though the explanation itself had become an inconvenience. "This is no longer your concern." Emily did not retreat. When a student is being treated differently without a clear reason, it becomes everyone's concern. The words lingered in the air. They were not loud, but they carried farther than anyone expected. A father volunteering near the drink station quietly placed a stack of paper cups on the counter and looked toward Ava. A grandmother visiting her grandson folded her hands together and frowned. Even several children who had continued eating only moments before now watched in complete silence. Malcolm remained composed. He neither interrupted nor defended himself. Instead, he observed how the room was beginning to answer for him. Leadership, he had learned long ago, was not about speaking first. It was about allowing the truth enough space to reveal who was willing to stand beside it. Ava still held her lunch tray carefully against her chest. Her shoulders were straight, but Malcolm recognized the tiny details no one else could see. The slight tightening around her eyes. The careful way she pressed her lips together. She was trying not to let anyone see that the moment hurt. It reminded him of something his own father had once told him. Dignity is not pretending pain does not exist. It is refusing to let pain decide who you become. Malcolm had carried those words through every boardroom, every negotiation, and every moment someone underestimated him before learning his name. Now he watched his daughter living that lesson far earlier than she ever should have needed to. Emily turned toward Ava with a reassuring smile. "Sweetheart, would you tell us exactly what happened?" Ava answered honestly. "I came to lunch with my class. I sat down. Mrs. Carter told me I could not stay there. I asked why. She told me kids like me should know where they belong." A ripple moved across the cafeteria. Several students looked at one another in disbelief. One little girl quietly whispered, "She really said that?" The volunteer father slowly removed the visitor badge from around his neck and approached just enough to be heard. "I heard it too," he said. "I thought maybe I misunderstood, but I did not." Linda's expression hardened. "You are taking my words out of context." Emily answered before anyone else could. "Then please explain the context." For the first time since Malcolm entered the cafeteria, Linda did not answer immediately. Her confidence flickered, replaced by visible frustration as she realized more eyes were watching than supporting her. Just then the cafeteria doors opened again. Principal Susan Whitmore walked inside carrying a tablet under one arm, clearly responding to the growing commotion. Linda immediately straightened her posture and called across the room with unmistakable relief. "Principal Whitmore, perfect timing. I need you to deal with this parent before this situation gets any further out of hand." Malcolm slowly turned toward the principal, his expression remaining perfectly calm as Susan approached without realizing she was only a few steps away from making the most important decision of her career. Principal Susan Whitmore slowed her pace as she approached the growing circle of students, teachers, and parents. Her eyes moved quickly from Linda Carter to Emily Foster, then finally settled on Malcolm and Ava. "What is happening here?" she asked in a measured tone that suggested she expected a simple explanation. Linda answered before anyone else could. "This parent is challenging cafeteria procedures and creating unnecessary disruption during lunch." Susan nodded slightly and turned toward Malcolm. "Sir, I am sure we can discuss any concerns privately." Malcolm smiled politely. "I would prefer to understand what happened publicly before we discuss it privately." The answer caught Susan off guard. She glanced toward Ava, who still stood quietly beside her father holding the lunch tray she had never been given the chance to enjoy. Emily stepped forward once again. "Principal Whitmore." Ava followed every classroom expectation. She was asked to leave her assigned table, and when she respectfully asked why, she was told that kids like her should know where they belong. Susan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. She looked toward Linda, waiting for an immediate denial. Instead, Linda simply crossed her arms. You cannot expect me to remember every word spoken during a busy lunch period. The silence that followed spoke louder than any denial could have. Malcolm watched Susan carefully. He had spent years interviewing executives, negotiating acquisitions, and evaluating leaders under pressure. He knew the exact moment when someone realized a routine situation had become a defining one. Susan was approaching that moment. As the cafeteria waited, Malcolm found himself remembering another lunchroom nearly 35 years earlier. He had been only 10 years old, standing with a plastic tray in an elementary school across town. A cafeteria monitor had looked at his worn sneakers, then at the white students already seated together, before quietly telling him that another table would be more appropriate. He remembered carrying his tray alone across the room while pretending not to notice the whispers. He remembered telling his mother that evening everything had been fine because he did not want her to worry. She had hugged him and said something he never forgot. Never let someone else's small view of you become your own. That sentence became the foundation beneath every success that followed. It carried him through scholarships, impossible interviews, impossible expectations, and eventually into boardrooms where people often underestimated the quiet man before learning who he was. Now he watched his daughter standing in almost the exact same position he had once occupied, and for the first time since entering the cafeteria, the weight of that memory settled heavily across his heart. Ava looked up at him with a faint smile that seemed intended to comfort him instead of herself. "Dad?" she whispered. "It is okay." Malcolm gently shook his head. "No, sweetheart. It is not." His voice never rose above conversation, yet every nearby student heard him. Susan drew a slow breath. "Linda, I need to know exactly why Ava was removed from her assigned table." Linda answered with growing impatience. "Because maintaining order sometimes requires difficult decisions, and I do not need every parent questioning how I run this cafeteria." Malcolm finally reached into his hoodie pocket once more and unlocked his phone. This time he tapped a single contact, lifted it to his ear, and quietly said, "Rebecca, please begin Protocol 1. I believe it is time." Across the cafeteria, no one recognized the name, but the calm certainty in Malcolm's voice caused even Principal Whitmore to wonder what had just been set into motion. Rebecca answered before the second ring had finished. "I am here, Malcolm." Her voice was calm, efficient, and familiar with moments that required precision instead of emotion. Malcolm never looked away from Ava as he spoke. "Please begin Protocol 1. I need the complete partnership file for Brookstone Academy, the scholarship agreement, the board correspondence, and every communication involving student equity policies. Notify legal that I may request a review before the day is over." Rebecca did not hesitate. "Already underway. The files are being secured now. The chairman of the Education Foundation is available if you need him. Should I inform the trustees?" Malcolm answered quietly. "Not yet. Let the facts finish speaking first." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. To everyone else in the cafeteria, it sounded like an ordinary business conversation. No titles, no explanations, no raised voice. Only Emily noticed that Principal Whitmore's expression had begun to change. Susan had spent years meeting donors, board members, and community leaders. Something about the confidence of the quiet father standing beside Ava no longer fit the picture Linda had painted. "Sir," Susan asked cautiously, "may I ask your name?" Malcolm smiled politely. "You may, but I think it will matter more in a few minutes than it does right now." Linda laughed softly, convinced she had regained control. "This is exactly what I meant. Empty threats. Every parent thinks they know how to run a school." Malcolm looked toward her without the slightest hint of anger. "No, I simply know how important schools are." His answer landed with unexpected weight. Several parents exchanged curious glances. The volunteer father folded his arms, no longer hiding his concern. Emily remained beside Ava, offering quiet reassurance simply by refusing to step away. Even the cafeteria staff had nearly stopped working. Trays sat untouched while conversations faded into complete silence. Malcolm noticed the school mission statement painted across the far wall in large blue letters. Respect, integrity, opportunity. He studied each word for a moment before speaking again. "Beautiful promises," he said softly. "Children believe those words long before adults do." Susan followed his gaze toward the mural, then looked back at Ava standing alone with her untouched lunch. The contrast unsettled her. She turned toward Linda once more. I need an honest answer. Did you tell this student that children like her should know where they belong? Linda hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice. My words have been exaggerated. Emily immediately replied, They have not. The volunteer father nodded. I heard the same thing. Then another voice joined them. A cafeteria employee slowly stepped away from the serving line. I heard it too, she admitted quietly. I did not say anything because I was afraid of causing trouble. The room seemed to exhale all at once. One witness had become three. Three had become enough to shift the entire atmosphere. Linda's confidence faded for the first time. She looked toward Principal Whitmore, expecting immediate support, but Susan remained silent, weighing every word she had just heard. Malcolm gently accepted Ava's lunch tray from her hands and placed it on the nearest table. No child should have to carry this much weight during lunch, he said. At that exact moment his phone vibrated once. Rebecca had sent a single message containing only 5 words. Board members are joining now. Malcolm read the message once, locked his phone, and slipped it back into his pocket as though nothing important had happened. Around him the cafeteria remained suspended between confusion and expectation. Students sat without eating. Teachers stood without speaking. Parents watched without looking away. Even the humming refrigerators behind the serving line seemed louder than anyone's voice. Principal Whitmore took a careful step toward Malcolm. Sir, she said, I believe we owe each other a proper introduction. Malcolm nodded politely. I agree. He looked down at Ava first. Would you mind sitting for just a moment? Sweetheart, I promise we are almost finished. Ava smiled faintly and obeyed, taking a seat at the same table where she had first been told she did not belong. Malcolm turned back toward Susan, then toward Linda, making sure every adult in the room could hear his next words. My name is Malcolm Brooks. Linda shrugged as though the name meant nothing. That still does not change school policy. Malcolm's expression never shifted. No, he answered, but it does explain why I know your policies better than you do. Several people exchanged puzzled glances. Susan frowned slightly, searching her memory. The name sounded familiar, but she could not immediately place it. Malcolm continued in the same calm tone. 8 years ago, after my mother passed away, I created the Brooks Education Foundation because she believed every child deserved to feel safe, respected, and seen inside a classroom. Since then, our foundation has funded scholarships, teacher development programs, student meal initiatives, and equity training across this state. Susan's face slowly lost its color. She whispered almost to herself, the Brooks Foundation. Malcolm nodded once. Yes. Emily looked from Malcolm to Principal Whitmore, sensing the shift before anyone else. Susan suddenly remembered the framed plaque hanging just outside her own office. She had walked past it every morning for 3 years. The largest private contributor to Brookstone Academy was listed in bold bronze letters. Malcolm Brooks. Linda laughed nervously. That cannot be right. Malcolm answered gently. I never came here to discuss donations. I came here because my daughter asked if her father could finally have lunch with her. He looked toward Ava, whose lunch still sat untouched exactly where he had placed it. Instead, the first thing I heard was an adult telling an 11-year-old girl that children like her should know where they belong. No one interrupted him. No one could. The words settled over the cafeteria with the weight of undeniable truth. Susan slowly lowered the tablet she had been carrying since entering the room. Mr. Brooks, she said quietly, I had no idea. Malcolm met her eyes. That is exactly the problem. You should not have needed to know who I was. Linda opened her mouth to defend herself, but Malcolm continued before she could speak. You believed I was just another father. You believed Ava was just another little girl. That should have been enough for both of us to be treated with dignity. Tears formed in Emily's eyes. Several parents nodded silently. A few students looked toward Ava with expressions of sympathy instead of uncertainty. Malcolm's phone vibrated once again. This time Rebecca's message contained only one sentence. The chairman has arrived outside the cafeteria. The cafeteria doors opened quietly, yet every head turned at once. A distinguished man in a navy suit stepped inside beside the school district's general counsel, both moving with the calm urgency of people who understood that every second now mattered. Principal Susan Whitmore recognized him immediately. Mr. Henderson, she whispered, almost unable to believe he was standing there. David Henderson, chairman of the Brooks Education Foundation, looked first at Malcolm, then at Ava, and finally across the silent cafeteria. "I came as quickly as I could," he said respectfully. Malcolm gave a slight nod. "Thank you." David's eyes settled on Ava's untouched lunch tray before he turned towards Susan. "Principal Whitmore, before anything else, I would like to know one thing. Is there any school policy that allows an 11-year-old student to be separated from her assigned classmates because someone decided she did not belong?" Susan slowly shook her head. "No," David continued. "Is there any policy permitting staff members to use language suggesting that children should know where they belong based on who they are?" Again, Susan answered quietly. "No." Linda attempted to interrupt. "This has been completely misunderstood." David looked at her without raising his voice. "Then I welcome the investigation." Rebecca's work had already reached every member of the Foundation Board. Copies of the partnership agreement, student inclusion standards, and the Academy's signed equity commitments were now sitting in the inboxes of trustees, district officials, and legal counsel. Malcolm had not asked for punishment. He had asked for the facts to be preserved. David held up a tablet displaying the partnership agreement signed 4 years earlier. Brookstone Academy voluntarily accepted these standards when it entered our scholarship partnership. Respect for every student is not optional. It is a condition of the agreement. The room remained silent except for the soft hum of the cafeteria refrigerators. Emily stood beside Ava with quiet pride, while several parents nodded as they listened. One cafeteria employee quietly wiped away tears, knowing she had remained silent when she should have spoken. Susan finally stepped forward until she stood directly in front of Malcolm and Ava. "Mr. Brooks," she said sincerely, "I owe your daughter an apology. More importantly, this school owes her one." She turned toward Ava. "I am deeply sorry that an adult failed you today." Ava accepted the apology with remarkable grace, simply nodding without saying a word. Malcolm placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he replied. "What matters now is what happens next." Susan looked toward Linda, her expression no longer uncertain. "Effective immediately, you are being relieved of cafeteria supervisory duties pending a full investigation by the district." Linda stared in disbelief. "You cannot do this based on one misunderstanding." David answered calmly. "No. We are doing this because multiple witnesses, your own colleagues, and your own principal have confirmed that serious concerns deserve a transparent review." Susan then turned toward the entire cafeteria. "Beginning today, every staff member, including school leadership, will participate in an independent review of our student equity practices. If we have failed even one child, then we have work to do." A quiet wave of relief moved through the room. Students began looking at Ava differently now, not with pity, but with admiration. Just as the tension seemed ready to settle, Malcolm's phone vibrated one final time. Rebecca's message appeared on the screen. "The district superintendent has requested to speak with you personally before anyone leaves this cafeteria." The district superintendent arrived at Brookstone Academy less than 15 minutes later, but Malcolm Brooks did not stand there like a man waiting for victory. He stood beside his daughter like a father who simply wanted the world around her to become a little more fair. That difference was what everyone in the cafeteria remembered most. The superintendent approached Malcolm and extended his hand. "Mr. Brooks, I have reviewed the preliminary information. I want to personally apologize to Ava and to your family." Malcolm accepted the handshake but remained thoughtful. "An apology matters," he said. "But what matters more is making sure another child does not experience this same moment." Those words traveled through the cafeteria quietly, reaching students who had watched everything unfold. The superintendent nodded. "That is exactly what we intend to do." Over the next several weeks, Brookstone Academy changed in ways everyone could see. Staff training was updated. Student feedback sessions were created. New procedures were introduced to ensure every child was treated with the same respect, whether their parents were famous, wealthy, unknown, or simply doing their best every day. Linda Carter completed the district review process, and the findings confirmed that serious judgment errors had occurred. Her role at the school was permanently changed, not through anger or revenge, but through accountability and responsibility. Malcolm never celebrated someone else's failure. He celebrated the lesson that came from it. A month later, he returned to the cafeteria, but this time he did not arrive quietly. He arrived with Ava. They walked through the same doors where everything had started, carrying the same simple lunch bag from that unforgettable day. The difference was that now the room felt completely different. Students smiled. Teachers greeted them warmly. Ava walked confidently toward her usual table, surrounded by classmates who saved a seat for her. Malcolm sat beside her and opened the container of cookies he had brought weeks earlier. "I think these finally made it to lunch," he joked. Ava laughed, the kind of laugh that showed she had moved past the moment without forgetting the lesson. She looked at her father and asked, "Were you angry that day?" Malcolm paused before answering. "I was hurt because I saw someone make you feel smaller than you are. But anger was never going to fix it." The truth was stronger. Ava looked around the cafeteria, watching students from different backgrounds sharing meals, conversations, and ordinary moments together. Malcolm understood then that the greatest victory was not proving who he was. It was proving that every child deserved respect before anyone knew their name. The world had underestimated him because they saw only what was on the outside. They saw a quiet father in a hoodie. They did not see the CEO who built companies, supported communities, and carried generations of determination with him. But Malcolm never needed to announce his power. His actions revealed it. He had not raised his voice. He had raised the standard. And in the end, the most powerful lesson was not about wealth, status, or influence. It was about dignity. Because real success is not measured by how many people know your name. It is measured by how many people feel valued when they stand beside you.